Hi, my name is Joel Beckerman. I'm one of the founders of Your Music, Your Future, which is an education campaign by composers for composers, so composers can understand how to make music a career and not just a hobby. And there's a lot to know. We actually have a new web series that we're launching, and one of the most amazing composers and breakthrough voices, composing voices right now is joining us right now, who is Pinar Toprak, one of my favorites, and also a great all-around person. Pinar has done so many different things in her career, relatively short career, creating the theme for Captain Marvel and the scoring, first woman to actually create the score for a $1 billion movie. Additional music for the Justice League, now on season 3 for Stargirl on CW, The Lost City, which came out in March with Sandra Bullock, Slumberland coming up, which is with director Francis Lawrence, who did the Hunger Games, and also featuring the actor Jason Momoa. Shotgun Wedding coming up with Jennifer Lopez and Lenny Kravitz. And last but not least on this list, anyway, is creating the theme and music for Thursday Night Football on ABC, the first woman actually to write a network theme for an American football league, again, that's on network. Again, please, wanted to welcome you, Pinar, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I always love chatting with you, so this is wonderful. Thank you.
Likewise, the honor is all mine. So, Pinar, I wanted to just talk a little bit. I think it's really great for people to understand a little bit about your musical background, sort of where music came from in your life, a little bit about your training. Can you just sort of tell us, the road that the serpentine road that took you here? Because I always I'd love to hear about your musical background.
Thank you. Yes. So I'm from Istanbul originally, and I started the conservatory, Istanbul State Conservatory, when I was quite young, about 5-6 years old. And that started out with my dad. He saw that I was really interested. They had this little keyboard for me. By the way, if anybody's hearing any construction noise that's happening outside, my apologies. I'm hoping the mic
you can pretend it's part of your score. It's
exactly. It's a percussion session happening in the background. They had this little keyboard, and as a little kid, I would go and play all the stuff, that I would hear by ear, apparently. And my dad, who used to be a violinist when he was younger, he's like, okay, well, let's see if he's going to get into the conservatory. And I did. And that sort of started my education from violin. As much as I love the instrument, I love writing for it. It wasn't my instrument. I switched over to classical guitar and ended up getting my degree in that. And but all throughout, I knew I wasn't meant to be a performer. I appreciated and loved performers, and I have so much respect for their craft. I could play just enough to get by, to get my ideas across, so to speak. But composition really wasn't a thing. I mean, it was a thing, but it wasn't. So I was writing a lot of pop songs because that form of composition was acceptable back in 90s, or early to mid 90s in Istanbul. And that also wasn't really satisfying for me. My heart was really in films. My dad was also a huge film lover, especially Hollywood films. So I grew up getting this education about different filmmakers and actors, and so that love was instilled from a very young age.
What were the films that really most inspired you, impressed you? It's like, wow, I really need to be involved in this kind of thing.
It was a lot of films, and I'm sure it was more than I can even remember, but there were, for example, I remember watching Superman, the 78 Donner Superman. That was incredible for me. I remember, in terms of really feeling the impact of music. There were a lot of films that I liked, but that film was, I think, the first one, and along with E.T. as well, that I remember watching and really realizing, wow, like the music is creating this magic. And it was with my little brain, I couldn't really understand it, but I felt it. And I had my little Walkman, and I would go and record the TV sound, and I would listen all over again just for the music. And I would say, man, I wish there was a version without all this dialogue so I could listen to the music by itself. And then I realized there are soundtracks, and my world expanded. But I mean, my dad loved Westerns, so we watched a lot of Westerns. We watched a lot of just classic Hollywood films, and anything and everything in between, honestly. I remember watching a lot. And I loved Cinema Paradiso. I still do to this day. That's one of my most favorite films. And then at different points of my life, different films have influenced me, of course, and they continue to do so. But as far as going back to my story, I was 16 when I finished conservatory in Istanbul, and I knew I wanted to come to the US. I was obsessed with American culture. I was obsessed with a lot of things, and I just loved Hollywood films. So, and I also love jazz. And a lot of people were telling me you're better off, being in that, because there's more opportunities. You can gig around, you can teach and whatnot if you study film scoring. Well, how many of you are there? The job possibilities are so slim. And I didn't really come from a wealthy family, so I kind of put myself through school. And so my thinking was, okay, don't risk it. So I moved here to, actually, of all places, Wisconsin, because my brother was living there at the time. I lived with him for a year. I was driving to Chicago every day to study with this jazz blues teacher and learning English. And I got my driver's license there. I got my social security in Wisconsin, everything, in Wisconsin. And I applied to Berkeley. And I went in, I was 17, as a piano performance major at first, because again, everybody was like, that's what you should do. And then I quickly realized that I was miserable. And I was really wondering, because I was at this place that I dreamt of my entire life. and I was like, Pinar, why are you unhappy? You're here, you made it, you're at this school. And I realized it's just, I wasn't going to be happy unless I was doing what I really wanted to do. And
You really had to jump into the impossible. It sounded like you really
yeah.
believed it was impossible. And somehow it sounds like you had that leap of faith at some point.
I think what happened was I was fortunate to have realized that I was never going to feel satisfied unless I was doing that, whether it led to success or not. It was not really result based. It was more about doing based. I wanted to do that, and whatever that resulted in would be great. But at least I knew I would have lived a fulfilled life doing something that I loved.
Yeah.
And that kind of became the catalyst, and I switched over to film scoring, and I finished Berkeley in 2 years. I was 19 years old when I moved to LA. And being an international student, I had to figure out, okay, I need to enroll somewhere else so I can keep having the student visa and all of that stuff. And while I was figuring out my work permit and all of that international student stuff, and I was getting my master's at Cal State Northridge in composition, and someone called the school asking for an intern that was getting their master's in composition to work at Paramount Pictures music department. So it was a common, the right place, right time situation. And the department chair recommended me. That became my first job in LA. So I was barely 20 years old, and I had this internship at Paramount Pictures and the scoring stage, which is no longer there anymore, sadly. And then I also knew, in terms, my brain still works that way. I have like a 1 year, 5 year, 10-year plan. And I always knew I wanted to work at Media Ventures back then. That became Remote Control for Hans Zimmer. And while I was at Paramount, it's a long story, but I managed to get an internship at Media Ventures in sample programming and all that. And then that led to an actual official position working as Hans's programmer about 6-7 months later.
Yeah. Well, let me take a half step back, because what I find so amazing in this. Like you said, part of it was right place, right time. But a lot of it, it seemed to me that you were really pushing. It seemed like there was a lot of drive. You knew where you wanted to go. At least you thought you knew where you want to go. And it seemed like a bit of a serpentine kind of direction. But it seems like a lot of the people that we speak to, a lot of it is just, you just have that burning desire to do something, and it's almost like you feel you can't do anything else. So
Yeah.
that sounds really quite fascinating in terms of the underpinning of all you were talking about. So what was the experience for you? Well, the other thing I was going to say is it sounded like being a Paramount, it kind of probably gave you a sense of, oh, it is a business, correct? That there is a business like this?
Yes, I was actually working, the department I was working at was the music clearance department. So even though while I was at Berkeley, of course, we talked about cue sheets and all of that, but I didn't really know how it was applied in real life. So I learned about the side of industry that I would probably not have learned until much later, very early on in my career, which was very helpful.
Cue sheets being, for those who might be brand new to this, really a listing of all the music that's been created that's part of some kind of an audiovisual work without a cue sheet going to the PRO or performing rights organization that represents you. There's no way to get paid, right? It's really the first step in getting paid. So it sounded like you really had a little bit of a crash course on at least understanding the mechanics of what had to happen. So what was, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I was just saying, I was agreeing with you.
So what was your experience at remote control? What do you feel you took away from it, remote control? I'm sure it was such a deep relationship and working so many different projects, but if you had to kind of boil it down, what were the sort of basic lessons, or maybe lessons is not the right word, inputs, inspirations, whatever you might want to call it, that you got working in such a successful operation? You always dreamed of being there. What was it actually like? Was it like what you expected? Was it different?
Some things were what I expected. Some things were very different. I think when you work in environments like that, you do learn. It is a lesson every single day, in goods and in bad. So I learned a lot of what to do, what not to do, because everybody operates their business in a different way. But what I did learn at the time was really eye-opening for me, was all the technology that was available, because of just how Hans has done things, the access to things and being able to see how things are done at the highest level at an early age. For me, like, oh my God, this is really great. So it created this inspiration list. Okay, I want to do that when I grow up, kind of thing. But then you also learn about how people operate and how we are very, a lot of us composers, we function very, very differently, and we just general workflow is very different. So I learned a lot about what to do, what not to do, in the way that I do things. I learned a lot about just business and conversation and how to handle myself in a meeting.
Yeah. Can you speak a little bit more about that? Because nobody teaches that in conservatory, do they? And what was that crash course? It was probably that 301 or 401 class you never got in school. What was that like in terms of understanding the business and what you needed to know to be able to make a career?
Yeah, I mean, that I learned honestly a lot more later on. That it started my thinking while I was there, because I was at Hans's for about a year, and I was quite young, 22, 23 years old. And I knew, right after Hans, by the way, I worked for a wonderful arranger, composer, orchestrator, William Ross, which was a completely different way of working. Like, I was working on penmanship and all of that, which is very, very different, but super valuable. I think I've always been very fascinated by entrepreneurship and the combination, the marriage of arts and business, because what I saw in this town, I think, there's so many talented people, amazingly talented people, smart people, And, you talk to them, you listen to their music, or you look at their art, and it's just incredible. Yet they're not where they need to be, or they should be, if it was just based on talent or craftsmanship. So pretty early on, I start realizing, okay, well, this is not only about that. Obviously, you need to have the goods to support it, when the time comes. But you need to really think about, because for me, it wasn't a hobby. It wasn't something I wanted to do for a short period of time. I wanted to see, okay, how can I make this into a business? How can this actually sustain my life? How can I, at the time I didn't have kids, but now I do, and one is about to go to college next year. So thinking about,
No pressure there with supporting kids.
I think all of that actually really helped me, because when the world expects something of us, we have two choices. You either give up and don't do anything, or you step up and you rise up. So for me, it actually made me work harder, and I keep learning. I read a lot of books on just general music and a business, both music business and business in general, even negotiating skills too. Like I love productivity in general. I'm always into like biohacking, and in terms of even like genetics and brain and everything, I'm fascinated by all of that. So, and I kind of get overwhelmed sometimes by how much I don't know. And it's like, oh, am I going to learn all the things I want to know? And there's enough time, but welcome to my.
I mean, that seems to be a theme with you, is always kind of like just a vacuum of trying to grab and gather information from so many different directions. And I think that's probably made you the success that you are in the work you do. One of the things I want to mention is, from my perspective, and I think probably most composers' perspectives, you've really developed your own voice. When people hear your music in your films, it's not somebody else's music. You're not copying anybody. You've really come up with your own composing voice, your own palettes of sounds in association with the films that you created. How did that develop? You were working under the wings of some very amazingly talented and very successful people, but how did you make that break into developing your own sound, taking those skills and extrapolating it into something that was truly yours personally?
Well, thank you for that. First of all, I appreciate that very much. Honestly, I think I don't even know what my voice is. I have my friends and colleagues that tell me, oh, that sounds just like you. And I'm like, okay, great. I don't know what that is, but thank you.
Just keep doing it.
Good. As long as it's working, we're on the right path. I think it's really a matter of, over the years, I had this classical background, I had this jazz background and pop, and I do listen a lot. And there's two different kinds of listening. There's music I listen to when I don't want to listen to music, and there's music I listen to when I want to listen to music. And I think at some point it's sort of like you gather up all of this information in life, and then it gets filtered through me, the person I am. And then if it's written in an honest way, it's going to have some common threads throughout, if that makes sense.
Oh, it totally. Actually, that's one of the most eloquent ways I've heard that said. That's a really, really interesting way to look at it, as you as the filter and the honesty is what brings your own voice forward. I'm going to steal that. That's really great. No, that's really a very, very eloquent way to speak about something which is so difficult to grab onto. So to jump to the obvious, the vast majority of working composers, specifically in big budget feature films, are white, male, many of them from the US originally. It really seems like, and again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I guess the best way to ask it as a question is, what biases did you find yourself coming up against? And how did you approach that? How did you think about it?
So I didn't think about it, and I didn't think I was approaching anything differently. That was sort of my operating system. For better or worse, I wanted to act as though the elephant didn't exist. And maybe it does exist, but again, I would not know how would I have lived my life as a white American male? I don't have that direct parallel life comparison to what would it be different? And maybe in a way it is different because I am not that, because it made me work harder without even realizing that I had to work harder. For me, it was just a matter of, okay, I needed to make sure my music was heard by the right people. I needed to be in the right environment. I needed to make sure that when luck presented itself, that I was ready for it. Those are the things that I was in control of. I wasn't really, and to this date, I'm not in control of the jobs that I get hired on. And we're not even in
maybe a little bit more and more. I think you're being a little bit modest there, but keep going.
Thank you. But there's still certain things that are for me, I won't mention, but I would love to actually work on that, that I know I need to work towards, because we're always proving ourselves for something that we're not doing, right? Because this business likes to put you in a box, or you do the superhero stuff, great, you stay there, or you do this and you stay there, and there's this comfort level associated with the people that hire us when we've done something more than once. And I'm always very interested in doing very different things. So I think that challenge is always going to be there, because even if it's not there, I'm going to make sure I create it, so I rise up to it. That makes sense. Mm-hmm. So as far as that big elephant topic, I to this date, it's not like I'm ignorant. It's not like I'm not aware of it, but I genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, I don't think that it is a disadvantage, because it is not a disadvantage. If someone thinks that I'm less because of where I grew up or my gender, that's their problem, really. So it doesn't affect how I write. It doesn't affect my work ethic or how I deliver things. And hopefully, if I'm given a chance to show that, that's great. That's kind of how I operate.
So tell me, how did I want to get a bit more on the business side, but I'm just fascinated by a lot of this. So let's talk a little bit about how football and ADC, how that happened, because I think that's just great. It's just great to, there's such a stereotypical sound, a stereotypical composer who writes those things. There's so many tropes that it's easy to fall into. So let me know, help me understand a little bit how that happened.
I got a call from Bob Owens from Amazon, who I had met before the pandemic. And it was just one of those very random phone calls saying, Pinar, I can't really explain too much, but there's this thing that's going on, and we're going to ask for several composers to write a demo. And I would like you to throw your name in the hat and do something if you're up for it. I was like, absolutely. And then the demoing process began. I wrote several demos, actually. The first one ended up being the one, but I just wanted to kind of cover different areas just in case, because these things can be, you always wonder, everyone that says, you want something different, but do you really want something different? So I just wanted to make sure, like, I do different things and kind of cover my base, so to speak. But it took a while, actually, because they wanted like several versions of the ones, even the theme that they ended up choosing. They wanted to see that it could lend itself to different genres. It could be rock, it could be jazz, it could be different kind of things if you wanted. So, and then finally one day I got a lovely email saying that my theme was the chosen one, which was a really, really beautiful day. And then we recorded it. I think it was June or July maybe. And they've been such a wonderful team to work with. Everybody there has been so wonderful. And tomorrow, actually, I'm going to be conducting the kickoff at the Fonda Theater. They're doing this big, Amazon's doing a big.
Wonderful.
And I'm looking forward to it. It's really, really fun doing anything with them.
That's so great. It's interesting at your at the point in your career where you've done so many amazing films and a lot of hit films, that you're still willing to do competitive demos. Can you just speak about that? Because there are a lot of composers who they get to a certain point where they may not be willing to do such things. What are your thoughts about that, especially about up and coming composers and whether or not to do those sorts of things?
Well, I'm a huge fan of demos because, and I not for everything. I think for certain things, if there's a certain style that it's very clear that I've done it a million times, I probably should not demo for that particular thing because I can probably send you hours of music in that genre. But anytime there's something different and unique that they may not have heard me do, and I may not even have heard myself do, I think it's actually a very exciting opportunity to not only show them that I can do it, but also prove to myself, oh yeah, I can do that. I think it's a very healthy, great thing to do, especially as an up and coming composer. I think I'm a huge supporter of it. And when you work with directors that you've never worked with before, music is such a subjective thing, and we can talk about it for hours, and we could be completely talking about different genres of music by the end, even though we think we're talking about the same thing. So I think it's just good to put a name in it, like, okay, this is what I'm thinking, and it becomes a point of discussion. I think it protects everyone. And like I said, I don't think I would demo for things I've already done a lot, but it is a very valuable thing.
So it sounds to me like it benefits both you and the director to be able to do kind of things, give you a more sense of freedom. So I'm just also curious, now maybe we can switch a little bit to the business side. Right. So there are a lot of people who, as you said, are amazing talents out there who have done all the hard work when it comes to music creation, learning the craft, learning the inspiration point of it, looking at technology and mastering the technology. But as you said, some people who don't necessarily have the whole picture, they're not looking at themselves as entrepreneurs. They're not looking at themselves as business people. Can you talk to me a little bit about, if we just cut it down to maybe 2 or 3 or 4 things that are the key points in terms of what composers should understand about business for themselves? Can you just tell us what are the things that are top of mind and most important?
Oh, let's see. I don't know about 3, 4 things. There's a lot of things, but understanding your rights in terms of when you're getting hired on a project, who owns the rights to what, and depending on what those things are. For example, earlier on in my career, if they couldn't pay me a lot as a fee, I made sure to own the music, including the masters. So because then you can do other things with that music, and there's a lot more possibilities, and you not only get your writer's share, you get the publishing and all of that stuff. And so starting up, I think that's really important to understand that there's a really good way there's something you can negotiate, because they're more cash poor. So they rather just give you less cash, in like low budget films, and they're like, okay, yeah, fine, you own the music. Not that they were going to do anything with the music afterwards anyway. So, those things can be valuable.
Unless there's a sequel.
Right. Well, yeah. But and for me, I saw everything as an investment. I still do to this day. So again, for example, let's just for the sake of someone that's doing a little independent film and it pays $5,000, and they're thinking, great, because look, I remember I survived on cup noodles and McDonald's and those dollar burritos for a long, long time, and there was a time $5,000 for me was massive to have, and but I always invested in both equipment and also live musicians, for example, because I knew every project I did was a demo for the next one. So, and I still think like that, by the way, that kind of thinking hasn't really left me. I'm always thinking, even when I do something big, I'm like, oh, this is going to help me get, like that guy. I'm proud of that music to put on my demo for the next one, even though that was the big film at the time to get, but
you had actually mentioned a couple of films you're working on right now, or at least one that you're particularly proud of the score. Can you just, I don't know if you're allowed to speak about that, but I'm going to prod you in anyway.
Yeah,
I'm sure you love all the scores you've done, but there's something that maybe is a bit more breakthrough for you, or something that you love in particular. Can you speak about that?
yes. So that is Slumberland. That is coming out on November 18th, 19, something like that. That is, as you mentioned, directed by Francis Lawrence and stars Jason Momoa. And it's a very special film. It's a fantasy film. I can't say so much about it. I think they have like a first look teasers out already. Um, it's a very thematic score. There's a lot of music. There's a lot of heart and soul in it, in terms of the writing and just the theme and everything that I love in film scores that I've loved growing up. I believe this film has. We recorded it at Air for 2 weeks. We had amazing musicians and the choir. It was a magical experience in every way. And it's one of the projects that the director and I really got along from our very first meeting. And creatively, he let me be. And weirdly enough, I mean, not really, I guess, fortunately, a lot of the things that I wrote were the first pass that they ended up in the film. That when that happens, it's just very satisfying, that you're aligned and things are meant to be. So I love the word honest, because I think we do a lot of things that for other reasons, whether for money, whether for this. And then this score was very, very honest to me. This, even just writing of the theme, was very honest to me. And in this particular theme, the themes are very important, because it just kind of carries the entire film. I can't wait for the world to see it.
I think the reason I was kind of putting in the spot on that is you had mentioned that is a demo for your next project, right? That you are hoping and seeing that there potentially are people who may fall in love with that movie and what you've done with it, with the score, and that is your next demo. Is that fair to say?
Exactly. And that, whatever that leads me to, would be my next demo for the next thing, if that makes sense.
And I think the other thing you point to, a little bit off topic here, but it's the relationship with the directors. When you click with the directors, you click with the story, that's when you have the opportunity and you're trusted. Those are the only ways that you really get a chance to do your best work. I think sometimes it's difficult, certainly, to pick and choose when you're first starting out, but it seems like more and more it might even be worthwhile to let something pass, hoping that the next thing might come up. A little difficult to do sometimes when you're starting out. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. I don't remember saying no much when I was starting out, because it wasn't even about it was about learning for me. Even if the project wasn't going to be big or fulfilling in some way, it actually was a learning ground for me, in terms of communication, in terms of delivering something. I always learn something from anything. It's always nice when all the things that are important to us check, but not all the time.
So let's just talk strictly about the financial part of being a composer. As you said, you're an entrepreneur. There are many scores now and jobs that you might be hired for, people might be hired for, that are all in projects where you get a single fee. You're paying for the musicians out of your own pocket. There's still fewer and fewer, but there are still some films where, and they might be the larger budget films, where you get a fee and then there's a separate budget for production. As you said, you always wanted to have live musicians on your films because it was part of what you felt made your work great. So that's one part of it, is the fees up front. The other thing, let's just talk about a little bit about, if you don't mind, is the role of performance royalties. So again, Your Music, Your Future is all about choices. One choice you can make is to do work for a single buyout fee, which essentially means you make money up front. You'll never see money again in the future of that project. There are licenses, as you mentioned, where you might be able to continue to own the music. And then there is working through the performing rights systems, where essentially you have the performing rights organization that you might belong to who would negotiate rates for performance royalties for you. Can you speak a little bit about sort of your choices that you've made and what you might recommend for other composers up and coming?
Well, it's sometimes you have a choice, sometimes you don't. And that's just kind of the reality of it. I'm not a fan of buyouts by any means. I do not think it's fair, but there are certain situations that I've been involved with where it's a matter of not having that job if you don't agree to it. And if that job means something to you, even though by principle, I know I should be saying no, everybody should be saying no. And if we all say no, it's going to go away. I can understand the psychology of, yes, okay, I'm going to do it because otherwise I'm not going to get it, because there's a line of hundreds of people that will say yes to it if I don't. So it's a very tricky question. I understand both sides of it. I am not in support of it by any means. But like I said, having been on the other side sometimes, it's not great. But sometimes you have to make certain choices for the grand scheme of things, if that makes sense. That's
and some composers, their experience that I know is if they do one film as a buyout, it becomes a precedent for the next film with the next studio or something. So how have you, or first of all, have you come across that? And if so, how have you managed to shift that conversation?
I have never done a film as a buyout. So that I can clear off. I've done other smaller and various things that happened with, without being mentioned. But I've never done a film as a buyout. That's and I don't think I would ever. I mean, unless Spielberg calls, I'm just no, I'm kidding. It's no, I've never, luckily, I've never been in that position. It's like I said, it's hopefully it doesn't set the precedent. And that's why it's really important to have the right representation who can look out for you and make that this is an exception. If so, you have to take something like that, because the reality is, yes, in an ideal world, 100%, I live with my principles and do everything based on my principles 100% of the time. That would be great. But when you think of everything else that a career entails, and you have to feed your kids and all the things, and you have to keep the
and create the demo for the next job.
Exactly. So yeah.
So I think that's very honest and very straightforward. The as you said, it is a bit of a two-edged sword. People have a choice.
Right.
Your Music, Your Future is about choice. It's about understanding the ramification of those choices, and to at least say, look, this is non-precedential.
Right.
I'm going to do this one, but I'm not necessarily saying I'm going to do it again in the future. Sometimes.
Yeah, I can say this. I've done over, I don't even know how many films, 450 films. And if you put all the projects, over 60 plus things in my career. And I've come across the buyout only twice in my career. So that's not too bad considering the numbers.
Yeah. So it is an exception. So if you just speak about your financial life as a composer, without getting too personal on this, when you look at upfront fees, when you look at performance royalties, when you look at other income you may get from other sources, whether it's mechanicals or when you look at sort of the pie, again, without specifics, where do you see your money coming from so that you can have a lifestyle, so that you can put your kids through college? Where do you see, what do you pay attention to in terms of the financial piece of what you do so you can do what you're doing now next year?
Definitely our royalties are a huge part of our income. It's a massive part of it, actually. And unfortunately, they're getting a bit less than what they used to be with thanks to streaming and such. But as we work on our career, yes, the fees get higher and everything, but really it's the royalties that pay a big chunk of our living.
It's so interesting that you mentioned that, Pinar, because I will point you towards some charts we're going to be putting up on the website shortly. Listen, these things take a while to filter down,
Right.
but in the charts, we can see that the amount of money that's gone towards streaming and royalties, performance royalties, has consistently gone up every year. It's just not enough. It's only about 20% of revenue now that go to composers for PROs. Everyone knows that that will increase. It'll continue to increase as maybe other pieces of the pie may not increase or even shrink a little bit. But it does take a while to see those changes and those shifts going down. And I think Your Music, Your Future will, be providing some real data on that and continuing to update it. But I think a lot of composers are having the same experience that you're talking about. Sort of reminds me a little bit of, I've been doing this a bit longer than you have, let's just say that. And I remember in the advent of cable, when it was like, I wrote all these, hundreds of hours of music for series, and I can't possibly make a living doing this. I have to figure out something else to do. And then lo and behold, the series that I've been doing, that the rates had gone up as the cable companies were making more money. And then they started repeating those series. And it's like, at some point, it's like, oh, I actually can feed my family this way. So I suspect we will all find out. Look, put in your calendar. Joel has a little bit of crystal ball, could be totally wrong, but I suspect not, that this is not the first time this has happened in PROs and the music business. And there's no reason to believe that it's the last time. Cable was the last time it's going to happen, but we'll all see. We'll continue to be updates on this. Pinar, thank you so much. You are one of these people who, I know everybody knows this from just watching. You have a huge heart. You are one of the people with a community gene. You care about not just yourself and your kids and your friends, but leaving a legacy of helping to uplift other composers, other artists, other people who are trying to find their way. So I can't begin to thank you enough. And again, Your Music, Your Future. Tune in. We'll continue to update things on the financial components of streaming, and let's see how it goes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pinar.